it seems obvious to recommend that current research at universities, entities under the NRF, science institutions, and sandparks should be maintained and expanded. To the government, I think we need to say fund ocean research, continue funding ocean research, because they do take it very seriously, and it's very encouraging to hear about the role that the DFFE is playing in that regard. But funding needs to be maintained and increased, because climate change adaptation is critically depends on that. Early warning systems, fish stocks, biodiversity and ecosystem preservation, all these things depend on the funding of researchers, and researchers need to be there to advise government at all levels in this regard. Then investing in researchers themselves in the skills pipeline, and enabling institutions to acquire the relevant skills. And yes, continue the inclusion of young researchers and students so that the demographics become more representative. And then another point is that our legislation is extremely good, our NEMA legislation, but it needs to be enforced. And there are a number of points that we can raise there in terms of enforcement. What do you think? Firstly, to our speakers, what do you think of these recommendations, and what would you recommend?
Thank you for that. And I think those sound, I think they sound good. I didn't hear the cross-disciplinary and the transdisciplinarity. I think Prof. Vogel gave us a really useful, clear definition on the difference, and I think that's really important.
Yes.
And then also, I think the importance of focusing research. Well, there were 2 points that, in fact, came out very clearly, I think, out of Prof. Vogel's presentation, and that was the community dimension in the science policy community interface.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I take the point about the language there on stakeholders, participants, community, etc. So I think just bringing in that theme of science plus policy plus community processes is important. Interface processes. So those were my points that I wanted to add to your list. Thank you.
Yes, looking back at the previous, at yesterday, what stands out is the importance of geoscience as well. Gordon Branson says, "Thank you for the high-level presentation, very impressive. Please can you mention regional partnership projects and joined up and systems thinking approaches, i.e. Nairobi Convention and the WIO region, including the open source at this stage. Has the open source at this stage been taken up to encourage potential citizen science initiatives?" And there's a link to the Nairobi Convention. Tony van der Walt says, "Very interesting, thank you." Yusuf Adam says, "This has been a most valuable and informative webinar, showing many linkages and the scope for integration required for transdisciplinary work. However, from several webinars, I noticed that research in the blue economy sectors is not as prevalent."
So perhaps I can, sorry, I should have put up my hand, sorry.
No, you're welcome.
Judy here. I mean, I think it's an interesting observation that to some extent the blue economy perhaps the focus on the blue economy has been the economic and social aspects, because it's seen as a catalyst for economic growth and for job creation. Yeah. Certainly in the African context. So I think really it's been quite an economically focused, and that shifted into a socially focused kind of research space. But I would suggest that we really need the climate science and the sort of the kind of work that was presented earlier, the sort of biodiversity impact of climate in the marine space, to also inform the blue economy. And yeah, I certainly, I think that it's growing. Maybe not so much in the South African space yet, but certainly in the Western Indian Ocean space. I think that the marine spatial planning process, South Africa's marine spatial planning process, will start asking the right questions once the sectoral plans get brought together in an integrated planning process. I think the sort of ecosystems thresholds issues will start being raised. I hope so, anyway.
Right.
Not sure if that's helpful.
I thought I'd just mention a little bit, so the talk that I gave was largely the ecological impacts and what's expected from the lion fishery, but at the same time we are doing work on the social components of the lion fishery and trying to grapple with what are the likely changes and how it's going to affect livelihoods, tourism, that kind of thing. So there is work out there. It's just it's a matter of needing to be presented. And what I can tell you about the lion fishery for now is that there is no doubt that there are going to be stresses on the livelihoods of people that rely on fish for food in the lion fishery. So that would be the small scale sectors, both shore-based and boat-based, but also within the recreational fishery. Everyone just thinks about recreational fishery as rich people's and sports. There's roughly about a quarter of recreational anglers actually rely on the fish that they catch to eat.
Yeah.
And it's something that we haven't really fully considered yet, but the recreational sector is enormous, and a great deal of people are actually use the fish as a supplement to their diets. They don't make ends meet at the end of the month, and recreational fishing is incredibly important, and it's something that needs to be considered. But the other part to it is that the other part of the recreational anglers are the wealthy group are self-subsidized. So if there's a distributional shift in fishes, or if there's less fish available, they will continue fishing because it is economics is not their major driver for fishing. So they will deplete the fish populations beyond what the commercial sector will do, and they will literally be competing for a scarce resource with the livelihood fisheries. Having said that, on the other side of that, the recreational angling sector, the wealthier part of the angling sector, enormously important tourism industry, to the tune of literally like 17 billion rand of economic activity generated per year. So it's an incredibly intricate balancing act to try and I think down the line we have to be thinking along the lines of how can we get the best benefit from the recreational fishery from tourism. So how can we use tourism for social development without destroying the opportunities that for livelihoods in the small scale sectors, and trying to understand how to do that is fundamentally important. But the first thing that needs to happen is that these sectors need to be well recognized. They are to a degree recognized in policy, but from a policy implementation perspective, there needs to be some thought about how these things are done. From the recreational fishery perspective, we need to very carefully think along the lines of a whole government approach that uses Department of Tourism, Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Higher Education and Training to try and get people, give them capacity to actually utilize the economic activity that's generated by the recreational fishery. And if we can do that, then I think we're moving in a direction that we should be, because if we don't harness that economic activity properly, we're going to be ending up with many people without food in an uncertain future.
These are definitely things that need to be decided by the authorities, and I'm not sure how they will do that. But certainly getting government departments together is a very important step in getting anywhere in terms of policy being used to address these problems and in terms of implementation. Yusuf Adam says, this has been a most valuable and informative webinar, showing many linkages and the scope for integration required for transdisciplinary work. Oh, sorry, I have already read that. I'm so sorry. Gordon Branson, on the proposals for inclusion and recommendations, may I propose an initiative to extend the research partnerships to local communities through citizen science empowerment projects, i.e. adult lifelong learning, school-based business or commercial sectors, and youth projects using mobile phones and science-based monitoring tools and methodologies, potentially NSTF, local and national awards for citizen science groups. In addition, scientists are currently engaging with citizen science groups to augment their research. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Gordon. And thank you for your regular input in the Q&A.